This is a TalkStation original podcast.
This is another article from the New York Times, but before I read it, I want to ask you a quick question, just yes or no. Do you believe in life after death?
Yes.
Good. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Well, apparently there are some scientists who are trying to study life after death, and I guess with scientists, they want to find something quantifiable, and that's what this article is about. It's entitled, Do You Believe in Life After Death? These scientists study it. In an otherwise nondescript office in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, a small leather chest sits atop a filing cabinet. Within it lies a combination lock, unopened for more than 50 years. The man who set it is dead. On its own, the lock is unremarkable, the kind you might use at the gym. The code is a mnemonic of a 6-letter word converted into numbers, and that code was known only to the psychiatrist Dr. Ian Stevenson, who set it long before he died, and years before he retired as director of the Division of Perceptual Studies, or DOPS, a parapsychology research unit he founded in 1967 at the University of Virginia. Dr. Stevenson called this experiment the combination lock test for survival. He reasoned that if he could transmit the code to someone from the grave, it might help answer the questions that had consumed him in his life. Is communication from the beyond possible? Can the personality survive bodily death? Or simply, is reincarnation real? This last conundrum, the survival of consciousness after death, continues to be at the forefront of the division's research. As far as reincarnation itself goes, I never had any particular interest in it, said Dr. Tucker, who set out to solely become a child psychiatrist and was at one point the head of UVA's Child and Family Psychiatry Clinic. Even when I was training, it never occurred to me that I'd end up doing this work. Now at 64 years old, after traveling the world to record cases of possible past life recollections, and with books and papers of his own on the subject of past lives, he has left the position. While it is technically part of UVA, DOPS occupies 4 spacious would-be condominiums inside a residential building. It is notably distanced from the university's main campus and at least a couple of miles from the medical school. Dr. Bruce Grayson, 78, says, nobody knows we're here. Ian was very cautious about that because he had faced a lot of prejudice. He kept a low profile. The question of life after death has been an existential preoccupation for humans throughout time, however, and reincarnation is a central tenet of belief in many cultures. Buddhism, where there is thought to be a 49-day journey between death and rebirth, Hinduism, with its concept of samsara, the endless cycle, and Native American and West African nations all share similar core concepts of the soul or spirit moving from one life to the next. Meanwhile, a 2023 Pew Research survey found that 1/4 of Americans believe it is definitely or probably true that people who have died can be reincarnated. Ben Radford, the Deputy Secretary of Skeptical Inquirer, a magazine dedicated to scientific research, believes that wishful thinking and general death anxiety has fueled an increased interest in reincarnation, and he finds flaws in the DOPS research methodology, which he often dissects in his blog. He said, the fact is, no matter how sincere the person is, often recovered memories are false. So there's a lot more to this article. When I first selected this article, I was intrigued by the title, Do You Believe in Life After Death? And that scientists were studying it. And I did not realize that the article was going to focus solely on this concept of reincarnation. Yes, reincarnation is one concept of what life after death could be. As a Christian, no, I don't see reincarnation. Mm-hmm. But as we've heard in the article, there are other religions who feel very strongly that, yes, this is what happens. And this guy decided he was going to prove it by setting a combination lock And then after he died, he'd let somebody know how to open it.
And yet the lock remains unopened.
The lock remains unopened. And some of the other researchers at this institute have done a lot of things to try to figure out how to open that lock, including bringing in spiritual mediums to see if they could get a message from the good doctor in the great beyond.
And yet the lock remains unopened.
The lock remains unopened.
I think this is our greatest challenge is, my double major in college was psychology, sociology. And someone said that's the worst thing for a potential pre-seminary student to go into. But I think psychology, sociology can be a bedfellow with theology if done in the right way. It helps me understand how people think, and that helps me in counseling and things like that. But I think in our culture today, and in full disclosure, I am a funeral director's son, so I know the industry, and I have some really dark humor because of the industry. But we've become so septic when it comes to death. Like, everything is squeaky clean. I had one of my members that they were in their 30s, and that was the first time they were going to see a dead body. And I'm like, really? Well, I hung around them all the time, and they didn't come after me. But I think it's our desire for wanting to have knowledge of how everything works, and trying to explain it away. But by doing so, we remove faith. We remove faith that just as Christ has died, Christ is risen. Our physical bodies will die, but we will rise with him. How does that work? I don't know. We call it the crux theologorium, the cross of the theologian. I paid $200,000 for seminary to go, oh.
Yeah.
But
it's a mystery.
It's a mystery, But yet, we spend so much time and effort trying to explain the divine by using earthly concepts. Mm-hmm. And yet, we have the promise of what's given to us right in the Word. And so, at least for me as a Christian, is I would rather trust what God tells me than what a bunch of scientists tell me I should believe in.
I was speaking with my father when he was reaching the end of his life, and he was an engineering professor, and he was very scientific in the way that he thought. And I asked him one day, I said, Dad, what do you think happens after you die? And he said, well, your heart stops pumping, and as a result, your organs are not receiving the oxygen they need, and eventually they all shut down. I said, but what happens after that? He said, nothing. I said, so 1 minute you're alive and you're cognizant and existing, and then there's nothing. And he said, yeah, that's what I think happens. Wow. And the whole concept of nothing just blew my mind. Now, to add to that, as he was getting closer to the end of his life, he did tell me one day, son, my greatest regret is that I don't have your faith. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, I said, okay, God is touching him. God is drawing him towards God. I'm okay with all of this.
Yeah.
I'm okay with all of this. But this scientific mind, he had no concept of a soul, of eternal existence, or anything like that. And we talked about how there are other religions have different views of what happens after you die. Christianity, we have the teachings of there's heaven and there's hell. And unfortunately, most of the imagery that we have about the two places did not come from scriptures. Our pictures of hell mostly came from Hollywood, television, and the Dante's Inferno. Okay, mm-hmm. The Bible doesn't say a whole lot about it. Our visions of heaven, we've got Peter at the pearly gates. Well, yeah, the Revelation talks about the city, the New Jerusalem, with gates that are like a giant pearl. Peter was given the keys to the kingdom. Oh, look, there's a gate. We'll call it the pearly gates. There's Peter there checking off your name as you come in. The Bible doesn't really teach us that.
And there's the slide that sends you down, right, if you're not on the list.
The slide if you're not on the list. Yeah, and the Bible does tell us does give us one view of heaven, and that is St. Paul. When Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 12, he talks about a vision that he had where he was taken up to the third heaven. He was caught up to paradise, and he heard all these amazing things and gained all this knowledge, but that he couldn't even talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's about all that we hear. Now, Jesus does tell the story about the rich man and Lazarus, and we see that somebody who was not good in this life goes to a place of suffering, and Lazarus goes to a place of comfort. And that's about all we get.
Yeah. Well, and I do like in the Revelation of St. John, I love that imagery where it says that you will neither hunger nor thirst, the sun will not scorch your back, there will be no more sorrow, and the Lord will wipe every tear from your eye. If this life is all that we have, stop the ride. I want to get off, because this ride stinks,
Right.
with hardship and cancer and arguments and division. But to know that we have something more that we get to, where Christ welcomes us and wipes every tear from our eyes.
Right.
What a beautiful picture that is.
What a beautiful picture. And as long as we're in this life, we are going to have death. People around us that we love and care for are going to die. Eventually we will die. People will miss us. And we have all these goodbyes. But when we get to heaven, no more goodbyes,
Yeah.
only hellos.